First thing I need to say about the learning outcomes are these, or is this. We spent a lot of time last semester in assessor training. And we spent a fair bit of time looking at training packages. And we looked at units of competence, we looked at elements of competence, performance criteria, range statements and evidence guides. Now we did say that as trainers you will be involved in running training programs against nationally accredited programs, or you'll be involved in running training sessions that are not nationally accredited. They are simply sessions that your company or institution wants to run. You'll be doing both. Now, looking at the relationship between competency standards and what we've been talking about here is simply this. You have your unit of competence, and we remember the definition of a unit is a large portion of a person's job. And all jobs are made up with a selection of core units and elective units. We then have the element of competence, and there are a number of elements of competence, all of which need to be present before we're happy that that unit has been achieved. There could be 5 or 6 elements within one unit. Here's the relationship now between the learning outcome. An element we made a point of last semester is better called a training outcome. All right? So we call elements training outcomes, and that means therefore that when we look at elements in a training package, all elements in a training package, all of them without exception, are performance-based. We made that point from our unpacking of training packages. You will always find they begin with a verb. You'll never find a cognitive element of competency within a training package. It means therefore this: if I gave you a unit or a cluster of units to deliver, immediately in those cluster of units you've got all the performance-based outcomes. And those training outcomes, which are performance-based, transfer immediately and become learning outcomes. So you would introduce them to your trainees. At the end of the session you'll be able to maintain, push, manipulate, pull, all the doing stuff. But when you deliver your training session, you will not only be teaching them skills from the training package, but they have to learn the knowledge that underpins those skills. Now we know what part of the training package to go to find out what knowledge we're going to cover. Therefore you don't have to do a topic analysis because the topic of learning or knowledge is in your evidence guide. What you therefore have to do is go to your evidence guide, look at the knowledge you're going to cover, and then you will inevitably have to write some cognitive learning outcomes to go with the performance outcomes, which are the elements of competence. If you're going to teach them skills and knowledge, sure, you can measure the elements at the end, but you've got to measure the knowledge as well. So it will behove you, therefore, to have to write. So your typical, here's my training package, convert it into training and then subsequently assessment. What you'll actually do therefore, if you're training 2 or 3 units, you'd have session plans. You'd have several session plans to go through this program. And in each session plan, you'd have a series of performance-based outcomes, which are your elements, plus your added cognitive learning outcomes to measure the knowledge. That's how they marry. Does that make sense? Sometimes you'll be running training without training packages and you'll then be writing your own psychomotor and cognitive learning outcomes. That's the relationship between the two of them. You'll see that develop as we go through session plans, and then when you start to deliver your 1-hour session, you'll see how that works. Now with learning outcomes, now here's the interesting thing about learning outcomes. With the learning outcome, if you're writing these raw, you don't have a training package to use, so you're writing all of them fresh, having thought about the learning domains. You would actually have the learning outcome statement written, but then what you always must include is a standard and a condition. So you not only write your learning outcome, which might mean might be make a cocktail. At the end of this training session, so we're doing bar and service, at the end of the session you'll be able to make a series of 3 common cocktails. That's the learning outcome. But what I don't have is the standard or the condition. And so very often learning outcomes state the standard to which you'll make that cocktail and the conditions under which that cocktail will be made. So I therefore, instead of saying at the end of the session you'll be making a cocktail, I will say at the end of the session you'll be making 3 cocktails in a 5-star restaurant. Now there is a condition and standard. I say the standard is the 5-star restaurant, and the condition will be it will be PM shift, and then you'll have to provide all your own equipment.
Okay, so that's why we were incomplete with that.
Yeah. Now, when you stop and think about your competency standards or your training package, what did we have with the element that gave us the condition and the standard? What came from the element of competence? Exactly. You had your performance criteria. And the performance criteria was the standard. Do you remember the example? We said you'll have to hand prune vines. So viticultural 1, level 1 on the AQF, we're going to be, at the end of the session, you'll be able to hand prune vines, but that's too broad. And there were 6 performance criteria. You've got to use the appropriate equipment, you've got to follow appropriate occupational health and safety, you've got to recognise and report on common diseases, you've got to communicate effectively within the vineyard. All of those are standards and conditions built in. So therefore, you've got it made for you with respect to the training package. Understand, therefore, that when you're thinking of measuring learning outcomes that you're designing yourself, understand you need to, for the trainee's point of view, to let them know they're going to make cocktails, but I can make a cocktail in the backyard with a couple of galvanised tins. Where am I going to be, and to what standard and what conditions? I'll give you an example. If I said to you, right, at the end of this sailing course, you're going to be able to rig a sail. It's not enough. You're going to be able to rig a storm sail on the ocean with gale force winds. Yeah, I'll specify. So you've got the standard and you've got the conditions within which that learning outcome is going to take place.